My son texted me on a Wednesday afternoon and I almost didn't read it. I was on the back porch with a half-finished cup of coffee, watching the neighbor's dog dig up the same flower bed it had been destroying all summer, and my phone buzzed on the armrest. I saw his name and I thought, he's fine. He texts every few days. I'll get to it after dinner. I set the phone face down on the armrest and went back to watching the dog. I'm glad I didn't leave it there long. Something pulled me back. Not intuition, not anything I could name at the time. Just a feeling that sat wrong, the way a smell in a house sits wrong before you figure out what's burning. I picked the phone back up. The text read, "Hey Dad, random question. You remember that thing we used to do when I was in high school? The check-in thing?" I went still on that porch chair. I knew exactly what he meant, and he knew I would. Let me back up, because this doesn't make sense without the context. My name is Gary. I'm 58 years old. I spent 27 years as a licensed insurance adjuster in the state of Ohio, and the last 9 of those years I ran my own small firm out of a converted 2-car garage in Westerville. I retired early, not because I had to, but because my wife Linda passed from pancreatic cancer 6 years ago, and after that, the idea of sitting across from strangers all day explaining coverage limits felt like something I didn't have the energy for anymore. I sold the firm, settled what needed settling, and I've been living on a combination of the sale proceeds, a modest pension, and Social Security since then. I am not a rich man, but I own my house, I have no debt, and I have enough in a retirement account to be comfortable if I'm not stupid about it. That last part matters. My son's name is Patrick. He's 31, works in logistics management for a distribution company outside Columbus, and about 4 years ago he married a woman named June, who teaches 2nd grade and makes better biscuits than Linda ever did, which is something I would never have admitted out loud while Linda was alive. They have a daughter, my granddaughter, who just turned 3 and whose primary personality trait is an absolute refusal to sit still for more than 40 seconds at a stretch. I adore her completely. Patrick and I talk on the phone every Sunday. That's not a rule we ever set out loud. It just became what we did after Linda died, the same way people fall into rituals without naming them. He calls around 7. We talk for 20 minutes, sometimes 40. He tells me about work. I tell him about whatever project I've been avoiding around the house, and eventually we run out of steam and say goodbye. It's a good system. It works for us. He does not text me on Wednesdays about things from high school. So when I read that message, I didn't answer right away. I sat with it for a minute. And then I called him instead of texting back. Because some things you don't want to have in writing until you understand what you're dealing with. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Hey Dad, casual. A little too casual." "Got your text," I said. "What check-in thing are you talking about?" Pause. Not long. 2 seconds maybe. But I've been reading pauses my whole career, and that one had weight in it. "Never mind," he said. "Forget I asked. How you doing? How's the back?" "Patrick." "Yeah." "What check-in thing?" Another pause. Then, the Tuesday thing, from when I was 16. I put my hand flat on my knee, and I breathed. When Patrick was 16, he went through about 8 months of running with a group of kids I didn't fully trust. Nothing serious ever came of it, but there was a period where I wasn't sure which direction things were going to go. We made an agreement, his idea, actually, which surprised me at the time. If he ever got into a situation he couldn't talk his way out of and needed me to come get him, no questions and no lecture, he would call me and say he was checking in about Tuesday. That was it. Tuesday, I'd come get him. We'd drive home in silence and talk about it the next day when things were calmer. He used it twice in those 8 months. Once outside a party in Ghana when things got out of hand. Once in a parking lot off Morse Road that I still don't have the full story on. After that, things settled down. He straightened out. We never had to use it again. He is now 31 years old and has not said the word Tuesday to me in any coded sense since he was 17. "Tell me what's going on," I said. My voice came out steady. "I don't know how." "It's not a big deal," he said, and I knew from the way he said it that it was. "I'm getting in the car," I said. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. June home?" "She's at school." "Good. Put on coffee." I hung up before he could argue. The drive to his house gives me time I didn't need. 42 minutes on 270 south. And my brain did exactly what you'd expect. Ran through every worst-case scenario. Discarded the least likely ones. Circled back to the ones that felt plausible. By the time I pulled into his driveway, I'd talked myself into and out of 4 different explanations. He opened the door before I knocked. He looked tired in the specific way of someone who's been managing something quietly for too long and is relieved to stop. We sat at his kitchen table. He poured me coffee. I didn't drink. And he told me. His neighbor across the street, a man named Dale who had moved into the neighborhood in March, so about 5 months earlier, had become, in Patrick's words, just a really helpful guy. Dale was in his mid-50s, recently relocated from Scottsdale. He told Patrick he'd taken an early retirement from a career in financial services and was doing some independent consulting work to stay busy. He'd helped Patrick's neighbor 2 houses down, a retiree named Howard, look over some investment paperwork. He'd helped another couple on the block understand their Medicare supplement options. He wasn't charging for any of it. He just, according to Patrick, liked staying useful. Patrick had met him at a block association meeting in April. By May, Dale had been to Patrick and June's house for dinner twice. By June, he'd offered to look at Patrick and June's 401k allocation, and had gently pointed out that they were holding too much in one fund category for their age, which, Patrick said, turned out to be accurate advice, or at least advice that matched what their actual financial advisor had told them 2 years earlier. That made Patrick trust him. In July, Dale started asking about me. Not directly. Patrick was careful to say that. Dale never asked, "What does your dad have saved?" or "Is your father sitting on a lot of equity?" What he said was things like, "It's so important for retirees to have someone in their corner who isn't just trying to sell them something." He said, "The window between retirement and 70 is when people are most vulnerable to decisions that look safe but aren't." He said, "Your dad sold a business, right? That's a real estate transaction's worth of liquidity if it isn't structured properly." Patrick had mentioned I sold the firm. He'd mentioned it the way you mention things to someone you've decided you trust. Casually, without thinking. Dale's response to learning that I had sold a business was to express concern, not excitement. Concern. He said he hoped I had good guidance. He said he'd been seeing a lot of recently retired small business owners get into trouble with what he called post-sale exposure. Money that was liquid and unprotected and attractive to the wrong kinds of people. He said if Patrick ever thought I'd be open to a conversation, not a sales pitch, just a conversation, he'd be honored to meet me. Patrick told him sure, maybe sometime. And then, 2 weeks after that conversation, while they were standing in Dale's driveway one evening, talking about nothing in particular, Dale asked Patrick something specific. He asked whether I owned my home outright or still had a mortgage. Patrick told him. He was standing at his own kitchen table telling me this, and his jaw was tight. "I didn't think anything of it," he said. He seemed like he was worried about you. I thought I was helping." I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. And I meant it. I've seen this structure enough times that I recognized it immediately. The neighbor who isn't targeting you, he's targeting the person next to you, the person who loves someone with resources. Patrick wasn't the mark. I was. Patrick was the door. I needed to think carefully about what came next. I spent 27 years in insurance, not law enforcement, but insurance fraud and financial fraud are cousins. The mechanisms are similar. The psychology is similar. And I knew enough to know 2 things right away. First, a man who moves into a neighborhood, spends 5 months building relationships with multiple families, asks low-pressure questions about retirees' finances, and positions himself as a concerned friend rather than a salesman. That is not improvisation. That is a practiced approach. Dale had done this before, probably more than once, probably in more than one city. Second, the moment I pulled away or signaled suspicion, he would either press hard before I could get traction, or he would disappear entirely. Either way, the window to do anything useful was short. I asked Patrick 3 questions. Had he or June moved any money based on Dale's suggestions? No. They'd been thinking about it. Dale had mentioned a specific type of annuity structure he said was underused by people their age, but they hadn't done anything yet. Did he know whether Dale had had similar conversations with Howard, the retiree 2 houses down? He wasn't sure, but Howard had mentioned Dale helped him reorganize something in June. Was there anything on paper? Any documents? Any account names? Anything with a number on it? Patrick thought for a moment, then went to the filing cabinet in the hallway and came back with a 1-page summary sheet Dale had left after their first meeting. It had the name of something called Meridian Preservation Partners at the top, and a phone number with an Arizona area code. I photographed it on my phone. Then I called a woman named Rosalind Beach. Rosalind and I had worked adjacent to each other for years. She was a fraud investigator for the Ohio Department of Insurance, and I provided documentation on 3 cases she'd built during my working years. We hadn't spoken in about 14 months. She picked up on the 3rd ring and didn't sound surprised to hear from me. I told her what I had. I read her the name from the sheet. I gave her the phone number. She was quiet for a moment. "How solid is your source?" she asked. "My son. He didn't know what he was seeing." "That's actually better," she said. "No coaching. Give me 24 hours. She called back the next morning. Meridian Preservation Partners was not registered with the Ohio Division of Securities. The Arizona phone number rang to a Google Voice number, and the name Dale. She said she couldn't confirm a last name yet, but the description and the methodology I'd given her matched a pattern they'd been tracking across 3 Midwestern states. Different names, different neighborhoods, same playbook. Find a community anchor. Build trust through genuinely helpful small favors. Identify a retiree with liquidity. Use a family member as the bridge. Don't spook him, Rosalind told me. If he reaches out to you directly, take the meeting. Just don't sign anything and don't move any money. So that's what I did. It took Dale 4 days to reach out to me. Patrick had apparently mentioned before any of this that I was pretty sharp about financial stuff, which I suppose was meant as a compliment, and Dale had taken that as a signal to approach carefully. His text came on a Sunday morning, which felt like timing designed to catch me relaxed and unhurried. He introduced himself, said Patrick had spoken highly of me, said he'd love to buy me a cup of coffee and just talk, no agenda. I texted back that I'd be happy to meet. We met at a diner off Broad Street on a Tuesday morning. He was exactly what the profile called for. Easy-mannered, unhurried, the kind of guy who lets you talk while he listens and makes you feel like what you're saying is interesting. He didn't pitch me anything at the diner. He asked questions. He listened. He said he'd been hearing from Patrick about the sale of my firm and just wanted to make sure I had good people around me. Because that specific financial moment, selling a business after a long career, was one of the moments he'd seen people get hurt the most. He asked if I'd be open to a follow-up conversation at my house where he could walk me through some general concepts. Nothing to sign, he said. Just information. I said sure. He came to my house the following Thursday at 10 in the morning. What I want to tell you about that meeting is not just what happened, but how good he was, because I think people underestimate that. They assume scammers are sloppy or obvious, or that you'd see it coming. They are not always. Dale was patient and precise, and he used real terminology correctly, and he never once did anything that felt like a hard sell. He talked about inflation. He talked about inflation. He talked about sequence of returns risk, which is a real thing that real financial planners worry about. He pulled out a 2-page document that looked entirely professional. And then he said, "What I'd suggest for someone in your situation, Gary, is allocating a portion, not everything, just a portion, into this vehicle before the end of the quarter. The entry window is tied to the fund's reporting cycle, which I know sounds like pressure, but that's just the structural reality." There it was. The artificial deadline. I recognized it the way you recognize a pothole you've driven over before. I nodded like I was considering it. Can I hold on to these overnight? Force of habit from the old days. I like to read things twice. He smiled. Of course. Take all the time you need. He left at 11:15. I photographed every page of the documents he'd left and sent them to Rosalind before his car reached the end of my street. By Friday afternoon, she had confirmed that the fund account listed in the paperwork was connected to an LLC that had been dissolved in Nevada 14 months earlier. The entity had a different name than Meridian Preservation Partners, but the same registered agent address. The same agent address appeared in a case that had been worked in Minnesota 2 years prior under a different name entirely. They picked him up the following Wednesday. I won't tell you the details of what they found, because most of it is still in process and some of it isn't mine to tell. What I can tell you is that Howard, the retiree 2 houses down from Patrick, had transferred $63,000 into a shell account the previous month. He got most of it back. Not all of it. I think about that number. I think about the Wednesday afternoon when Patrick's text came in, and I almost left my phone face down on the armrest. I think about what would have happened if he hadn't sent it. If he'd kept carrying whatever he'd been carrying for the weeks he'd spent trying to decide whether it was worth worrying about. He told me later that he'd almost talked himself out of sending it 3 separate times, that he'd thought maybe he was being paranoid, maybe Dale was exactly what he seemed, maybe bringing it up would just make him look stupid in front of his father. What changed his mind, he said, was June. She'd come home one evening while he was sitting at the kitchen table with the Meridian paperwork in front of him, trying to make sense of something that didn't quite add up in the fund description. She looked at his face and asked what was wrong. He told her he wasn't sure. She said, if you're not sure, just ask your dad. That's it. That's the whole thing that changed the outcome. After it was all settled, after Rosalind's office had done what it needed to do and Patrick had stopped looking like he was carrying something heavy around behind his eyes, I drove out to his house on a Saturday for no reason other than to sit on his back porch and drink bad coffee and watch my granddaughter terrorize the yard. At some point in the afternoon, she came over and demanded I pick her up. She's 3. She doesn't ask, she demands. I picked her up and she immediately started yanking on my ear, which is apparently what passes for affection at that age. Patrick was watching from the porch steps, and he caught my eye for a second, and something passed between us that didn't need words. He nodded. I nodded. That was enough. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. I spent 27 years in insurance claims and fraud assessment. I know how these things work. I know the playbook, the methodology, the psychological hooks, the pressure tactics. I sat across from Dale in a diner for an hour, and I thought, all right, I see what this is. But I also know that if Patrick hadn't sent me that Wednesday text, if he'd talked himself out of it, which he nearly did, I would have eventually met Dale through a normal channel, a neighborly introduction, a cup of coffee at Patrick's house, and I would have been walking in without knowing to look. 27 years of experience and I still would have been walking in cold. What stopped it wasn't my career. It was a check-in code that a 16-year-old boy and his father put together on a Sunday night before the school week started, because the kid was smart enough to know he might someday need a way to ask for help without saying out loud that he needed help. I've been thinking about that since the Wednesday text, about how many people don't have a thing like that. A quiet signal. A word that means come find me. Something's not right, I need you and I don't know how to say it. Not just for teenagers, for parents, for siblings, for anyone who might someday be in a situation where they're managing something alone that they shouldn't have to manage alone. The people who run the kind of scheme Dale was running, and there are a lot of them, more than I think most people understand. They are counting on isolation. They are counting on the fact that their target won't say anything, out of embarrassment or uncertainty or the very reasonable worry that it'll sound paranoid. Dale had spent 5 months building exactly the kind of environment where Patrick would feel slightly foolish bringing his concerns to his father. Because Dale was so normal, so helpful, so neighbor-shaped. He almost pulled it off. So if there's someone in your life, a parent, a grown kid, a brother or sister, and there's no quiet signal between you, make one. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to mean anything to anyone else. It just has to mean something to the two of you. A word, a question, a phrase that sounds like small talk to everyone listening but means, I need you to come to the one person who matters. Patrick used ours and I came. That's all it took. It didn't need to be anything more than that. I keep thinking about that Wednesday afternoon on the back porch. The phone face down on the armrest. The neighbor's dog in the flower bed. Me telling myself it could wait until after dinner. What I know now is that waiting would have cost me more than money. It would have cost Patrick something too. The quiet confidence that his instincts were worth trusting, that reaching out to his father wasn't an overreaction. That cost is harder to measure than $60,000, but it doesn't go away. What made the difference in this story wasn't my career. 27 years in insurance fraud, and I still walked into that diner without knowing exactly what I was looking at. What made the difference was Patrick's character. Specifically, the part of his character that made him sit at that kitchen table with documents he didn't fully understand, feel something wrong in his gut, and choose not to ignore it. That takes something. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people talk themselves out of it because the worry feels presumptuous, or because the person they'd be calling is someone they don't want to trouble. Patrick texted me anyway. That decision, small, uncertain, made in about 30 seconds, is the reason things turned out the way they did. And June. I don't want to skip past June. She came home, saw her husband's face, and said 4 words. Just ask your dad. She didn't tell him he was being paranoid. She didn't tell him to handle it himself. She looked at the situation with clear eyes and pointed him in the right direction. That kind of clear-seeing is its own form of wisdom, and it's not passive. It takes paying attention, really paying attention to the people you love. Dale was counting on the opposite. He was counting on isolation. He was counting on the fact that Patrick would feel vaguely embarrassed bringing something uncertain to his father, and that I would feel vaguely flattered by a new acquaintance who seemed to respect my background. He built the whole structure on those 2 assumptions. He'd done it before, in other neighborhoods, under other names, and it had worked. The reason it didn't work this time isn't that we were smarter than his previous targets. It's that we stayed connected to each other in a way that made the isolation he was engineering impossible to complete. That's the thing I keep circling back to. The scam was sophisticated. The documents looked real. The terminology was accurate. A person without my professional background could have been sitting at that kitchen table signing something that would have taken years to untangle. None of my knowledge mattered until Patrick used our old code and gave me the context I needed to use it. His courage to reach out, my willingness to pick up and drive over, June's steadiness in the middle of it. Those 3 things together are what actually stopped it. I don't think you can manufacture that kind of connection after the fact. You either have a signal with someone or you don't. You either have a relationship where asking for help feels possible or you don't. And if you don't have that yet, the only time to build it is before you need it. Patrick used ours on a Wednesday afternoon and I almost missed it. I'm glad I picked the phone back up.